And welcome back to the Luke Deckard Show. I am your host, Luke Deckard. I'm really excited about tonight. Tonight we have Jonathan Whitelaw with us. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hi, everybody.
Um,
Thanks for having me.
yeah, you're more than welcome. Tonight we're going to be discussing Jonathan's top six, his top six movies and films, and he's picked a good list. Let me tell you, I'm
Stop.
excited to
Stop
dive
it, Luke.
in
Stop
to
it.
them. What was that?
Stop it. You're making me blush.
Oh, it's a good list, but what I haven't said are what I haven't told you is that there are certain things about some of them that I question. So it'll be I'm
Okay.
excited to discuss those elements of some of these picks, but in general, this is a damn good list
Thank you.
of
Thank
uh,
you.
of books and movies to be, if you're stuck on a desert island or whatnot, and this is all you got to feed your mind, you know, it could be worse. It could be much worse.
Excellent. That's
You could
that's
have
all.
picked.
That's all I've ever aspired to professionally. Is it could be worse than Jonathan Whitelaw. That's it. I'm happy with that. Put that in my tombstone.
You know, I mean, you could have picked High School Musical. So at
I
least
could have. I could have. I
at least
could have.
that's not on the
I
list.
could have. Exactly. Now
So
we're gonna be bombarded with High School Musical fans, and neither of us shall ever be able to live it down. But hey ho, it's worth it. It's worth it.
it's true. It's true. I don't know. Do you ever have you did you ever watch Mystery Science Theater? Does that ring a bell?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Was that the was that the one that it was like a movie, and
Yes.
it's the three
Yes.
characters down the bottom watching the movie?
Yes.
I remember it. Yeah,
So if you don't know, they still do comedy commentaries, but
right.
under a different name called Riff Tracks, and they've done High School Musical, and it is hilarious to watch that movie with them critique comment, like, making their comedy commentary.
I do actually remember. I remember coming across it. I don't ever remember seeing it in UK TV, but I remember being on holiday in
Mm.
like Florida and California and things like that growing up, and it being on at funny times of the day, and I didn't know. I actually didn't know until recently, as in like maybe a couple of years ago. I didn't know that the movies that they were watching were real movies. As in, I thought
Oh
that was the
wow!
show. I thought that the whole show had been built around, they get actors in to ham it up, and then obviously they provide commentary for it. I thought the whole thing was the show. I didn't realize that they were actual movies that had been released on video or in the cinema or what have you. Didn't realize it until maybe about 2-3 years ago. Yeah,
Oh my gosh!
which makes it
Really?
even more hilarious. It makes the whole thing even more hilarious. That
Yes.
it's even better. It's a great show. It's brilliant. It ran for
Yes.
years, didn't it? It was on decades even. I think yeah,
Yes. Yeah, like
it was
80s
endless.
into the 90s. I want to say upwards to like early
Yeah,
2000s, but
yeah.
I mean, I see the thing is I grew up on that show, which I think is the root cause of why I'm so darn cynical when I watch movies and TV shows. And I just sit there and rip them apart the whole time, but it's made me like extra critical because I grew up on a diet of Mystery Science Theater.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's one of those. It's like it's the sort of definitive cult show, isn't it?
yes.
It's a definitive. It's almost like a cult classic.
Yes.
And I always remember there's an episode of The Simpsons. The name escapes me, but it's the one where Bart isn't allowed to go and see the Itchy and Scratchy movie,
Mm.
and then at the end of it, it fast forwards 30 years, and Bart's the supreme. Leader of the Supreme Court and things, as has been a recurring gag throughout the episode. And he and Homer go and sit down, and that's a parody of it. It's a pastiche of it because you see them walking along the bottom to then take their seat to the right of the screen to watch this film.
Oh,
And that's it. That you've made it. You've made it into kind of the popular cultural zeitgeist when
yes.
you get parodied by The Simpsons, particularly in the early 90s. I think that's like a sort of series 4 episode, series 3 episodes or something. Yeah.
Ah,
So there
that's
you
like
go.
that's like good Simpsons territory. Good Simpsons
Absolutely.
territory.
Yeah, we could spend the whole show me talking about how I'm a member of various Facebook groups that are Max Power memes and things like that, and obscure. I recently joined one that's obscure Simpsons, where everybody contributes obscure screen grabs, obscure characters, obscure. And it's genuinely a bottomless pit of
I love that.
hilarity, obviously. But I'm gonna cut it short there because I could talk about The Simpsons from here.
I mean, I could too. I could for a while. The thing is, like, I grew up watching it a lot, but I didn't like. I didn't digest it enough to retain it, but I have been
Yeah,
slowly rewatching it on Disney Plus,
yeah.
and I'm just so much has been lost on me. But going back to it, I'm like, oh my gosh, this show is just it's perfect. It's just
It
so
is.
good.
It is. And incredible that it's still running.
It's true. I don't know how
89, I
good
think, the
it
first
is though
one is.
now. Is it still
It's
good?
incredible, and it keeps getting renewed and things like that. But yeah, I mean, it comes under a lot of stick, obviously, because
Yeah.
it's it's 30 what 34 years old this year. So it's,
Yeah.
I mean, what any of us at 34 are still as good as we were, when we were 16 or 10 or what have you. So it's, yeah,
No
it's.
kidding.
I think we can maybe cut them a little slack.
I think so. I think so. Oh, a comment has in the chat says that it's the Itchy and Scratchy the movie season 4 episode 6
There we go. There we
for
go.
anyone wanting to
Excellent.
know.
I was close. I was close. I thought 3 or 4. Yeah.
Yep, you
Yeah.
did.
Brilliant episode. Fantastic. Very rarely on. You very, very rarely see it on in sort of syndicated TV and things like that. But who
Yes.
watches TV these days? It's
And
just
right.
Disney Plus.
Right. That's the funny thing is there's two things I'm rewatching. One is The Simpsons sporadically, and the other is X-Files.
Yep.
And in my head, I'm reverting back to like when I was like 8 or 9, and I'm like, I'm not just watching them on like the screen
Yeah.
here through streaming, but I'm like remembering like
Yeah.
commercial breaks and what was on like
Yeah.
Fox TV at the time, and it's just
Yeah.
it's bizarre.
We
Yeah.
did the same. We did the same. Whoa, this is the thing. I keep forgetting what year it is. So it would have been probably about a year ago that we started rewatching. And the thing was, I wasn't allowed to watch it when it was on. So it was always on BBC Two Thursday night, 9 o'clock or something like that when it was first broadcast. And I wasn't allowed to watch it. My parents were always very, very liberal when it came to what I was allowed to watch and things like that. For example, Asda. And there are other supermarket chains available, obviously, but Asda in the late 1990s, mid to late 1990s, did this offer on their videos where it was like 3 for 2 or what have you, 5 for 3. And so I used to get, like, we used to have the Lethal Weapon movies, we had the Die Hard movies, we had, all of these ultra violent, 18s, 15s, and 18s. And my brother and I used to sit, that's what we used to sit and watch on a Saturday morning. We would say, stick Die Hard on, stick Die Hard with a Vengeance on, and like my brother's 8 years younger than me. So he didn't watch Fireman Sam and Thomas and Friends and things like that. He sat and watched, Riggs and Murtaugh. And that was the thing. Like my parents were completely liberal about it, and that and it's gone on and shaped me into the monster that you see before you. But I wasn't allowed to watch the X-Files. They drew the line at the X-Files, and that was the thing. It was so popular. It was massively popular in school, and so people would come in on a Friday morning and say, "Oh God, did you watch? What did you think of Mulder and that?" And I never got. I think I maybe caught 1 or 2 episodes later. When I was a bit older.
Yeah.
So rewatching it now, it's a brilliant show. It is pitch perfect, and you're right. Sitting watching it now, 30 odd years on from, or maybe just under 30 years on from when it first came on.
Yeah.
It's remarkable how good it is and how good it still is. And my wife and I said that when we sat and put it was one night. I think we were in some sort of lull between series or something like that, and Anne-Marie said, "Oh, should we watch the X-Files?" I said, "Yeah," because I never got to watch it when it was first on, and loved it. And again, just one of those shows that sort of transcends what it was. It's everybody, you didn't need to watch it almost to know Mulder and Scully and the music and UFOs and Truths Out There and the Smoking Man and all this kind of carry on.
Yes.
But yeah, fantastic stuff.
No, I completely agree. So after that's all over the place, us talking about Simpsons and X-Files and stuff. For those who don't know who you are, Jonathan, tell the audience listening a little bit about who you are.
Certainly. My name is Jonathan Whitelaw, as I think we've established, hopefully. And I'm an author, journalist, and a broadcaster. I'm originally from Glasgow in the UK, but I'm currently in Alberta in Canada, which we moved over here in May. And my most recent book is The Bingo Hall Detectives, which was out in April last year and just come out here in Canada. And my new one is The Village Hall Vendetta, which is released on May 11th, I believe, in the UK. And it's cozy crime, and it's set in the Lake District. And I'm very proud of it.
Wonderful. Before we dive into your top 6, there's a couple more comments that have come in. One is remember 90s Bart constantly outsmarted his dad's attempts to steal his precious Butterfinger. Yep. I can't think of Butterfingers without thinking of Bart Simpson. That marketing was so tied
Yeah,
together.
no one had put a finger on my Butterfinger. Do you know? I again would have caught that, on holiday and things, because I don't remember us having Butterfingers in the UK. I don't
Well, I
think we
don't know.
got it. I don't think we ever got it. Certainly not in the 90s. But I remember the Family Guy pastiche of it. There's
Oh,
a
I
Family
see.
Guy gag that Stewie says something like, "Oh, this is worse than that time that I sold out to Big Butterfinger." And he's sitting on a bench going, "No one had better lay a finger on my Butterfinger."
Oh, that's
Do
funny.
he does that? So yeah, that would have been around the time of the Who Shot Mr. Burns, the sort of
Oh, right.
two-parter, the end of one series and the start of the 6 and 7 or 7 and 8 or something like that. And
Right.
I mean, it went global. Obviously, that was the sort of height of the show, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
wonder, because obviously, I mean, because I grew up in the States, so I wonder if that is. I wonder if you had been like in the States, if your parents would have cared less about you watching X-Files and things like that, because
Possibly.
it was so like it wasn't seen as like bad or even
Yeah.
that scary, but it was just kind of there. So that's, yeah, fascinating,
It
fascinating.
is, I mean, like to this day, and the thing is, like my parents don't really remember it. They don't. They were raising
Of
two
course.
kids in the late 90s. It was just another show. They were aware of it. But I do genuinely remember being told specifically no, you're not allowed to watch that, Jonathan. And it was
Yes.
like the one of like 3 times that they ever said something like that. And that's probably what makes it more memorable.
It does. I think one of these days I need to do a show on all of the TV shows I was not allowed to watch, but somehow found ways of watching.
Mm.
Because I think that would be hilarious.
It's a lot easier for kids now, though, right? It's like they can sit and watch it, and yes, I am acutely aware that I am now a middle-aged man and also a dad, and I'm allowed
Yeah.
to say these things. But like back then in the 90s, if you missed it, could you maybe record it? Could you
Yeah,
maybe get a video from a friend and then watch it if you had like a night in your own or what have you? It was a lot, it took a lot more thought. It took a lot more sort of,
it
2, 3
did.
steps into the future. Whereas now you just get a stream of it. You can
Yep.
watch it on your phone.
You had to put the VCR timer on, make sure it was set to record. I remember there was one time there was a show I really wanted to watch, and I pissed off my mom and I got grounded, and she was like, "No TV for you," and I was like, "Okay, but I'm gonna go set the recorder,"
Yeah.
and she caught on to it, and
Oh.
I went in the TV room and saw the recorder was turned off, and I was like,
No.
"No!"
And then what to do with the tapes? What did you do with the tapes? Like, did you run the risk of leaving it, putting a sticker on? I remember you used to get the stickers
Yes.
along the bottom of it. Did you write something else on it to try and then you would then have to rely on your own memory to know that, Coronation Street, for example, was
Right.
actually WrestleMania 15. It was what a time to be alive, as they
I know,
say.
right? There's definitely a VHS out there where there's probably a centimeter thick layer of whiteout from where you've I need to cover this, and this is the new tape.
Constantly.
Cover
Yeah,
this is the
yeah.
new tape with
Yeah.
the
And you could only get away with sort of scoring it out because space was at a premium on those stickers.
Yep.
And it was all you always had to do the sticker on the bottom of it because if you
Yep.
put the sticker on the top, it was never quite the same. Never had quite the same, authority on it. At the
Exactly.
bottom, that was it. If it was on the bottom, that's what was on that tape. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Kids these days, they don't know what they're missing out on.
They don't. They don't. A couple of comments in the chat. Chief Brother Rule says it's X-Files spooked him and thought it was scary. Biffer says he had to wait 10 years to watch the last episode of
Oh,
Deep
blimey.
Space Nine. That
Right.
is a tragedy. Oh my gosh. Wait, did you just never watch Deep Space Nine anywhere else? I mean, how did you have to wait 10 years to see the final episode of Deep Space
The
Nine?
series didn't run 10 years, did it? I don't think it was.
It
Was
ran
8 series it
7.
run?
So
7, there you go.
so
The whole series again, plus 3. That's
yeah, that's insane.
blimey.
But anyway, let's talk about your top picks, right? Let's pull up the first one. We'll start with the book first.
Okay.
So your first pick is William Golding, Lord of the Flies.
Yes.
For those at home who don't know,
Yep.
what is the Lord of the Flies about?
So the difficulty I always find with books of this sort of age is, do you spoil it for people that haven't read it? Because it's 60, 70 odd years old. I can't remember when it's first published. I think it's 50s. I think maybe the 50s, late 50s, 60s. I'm sure someone will know better than I do. I also like, Luke, that you've picked a cover that it mentions that is the winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature, because kicking that off sort of sets me on, like, you know, an intellectual plane that I shall never ever achieve ever again. And that's not the reason why I picked it, but it's nice to be sort of vindicated. A nice bit of happenstance there, a nice bit of serendipity. William Golding's Lord of the Flies. Essentially, it sees a load of schoolboys, who are, after an accident, are washed up on a deserted island. And it doesn't take long for the kids to separate themselves into tribes, essentially. So there's really, really stuffy sort of, you know, private grammar school kids who are very, very disciplined. And then you've got these other kids who the majority of the story is told from their perspective, who are a little bit, you know, who aren't that, you know, that sort of socioeconomic group. And the book itself is essentially an examination of the human nature and what would happen if all rules are abandoned, or if you try to make rules for yourself. And it's pretty brutal. It doesn't pull any punches. You know, you have to remind yourself, I think, reading it, that these are school kids. They are, you know, 12, 13 years old, maybe at the oldest. I think they might not even be as old as that, actually. And, you know, obviously it's very much a parable for wider society, but within the context of the story, it really, really doesn't pull any punches in terms of the violence, in terms of the sheer sort of nastiness, that, you know, the tribalism that comes to the surface without much prodding, quite frankly. I loved it. I mean, I loved it from the moment that I first read it. I read it in school, actually. I read it in secondary school.
Are they allowed to read it in school today?
I'm not sure. It was always I mean, like, we read it as a class activity. So, and again, actually thinking back on it, this would have been, I think this was maybe the early 2000s. I think maybe about 14, 15 when they let us read it. As they always did in class, you would get, like, some teachers would just read the whole thing to you as a sort of monologue, but other teachers would let you read, you know, they would go through, right, okay, Jonathan, you read the first 5 chapters, or sorry, the first 5 paragraphs. Then, you know, John Smith, you do the next 5. And we got to do that with this. And there was a few classes. It was on the sort of curriculum for the whole year. And of course, invariably, as happens in the novel, it happened in real life, where there's a character called Piggy who is, you know, rotund. He wears glasses. He's picked on by the other kids. He's got asthma. And he very much latches on to the kind of leader figures who try to protect him, and then ultimately he ends up dead. He ends up killed. He's not the only child that ends up dead in it. The eponymous Lord of the Flies is actually a pig's head, and it's a pig's head that attracts all the flies because it's rotten. And the kids have killed this pig, and it was a monster. And all again, without going into sort of too much of the detail for anyone who hasn't read it, because it is a fantastic read. It's wonderfully written. But I remember reading it at school and being completely in awe of it. Not just because thinking, well, we're school kids and we're reading this, and, you know, there, but for the grace of God, something like this might happen. But there's an undercurrent of terror about it. There's a really, really strong, and it's a testimony to William Golding's writing ability to maintain this perennial fear, you know, fear of being abandoned on an island if you're a young child, obviously, the fear of never being rescued, but also the fear of your peers, and the fact that it can change like that. You know, society can change like that. One minute you can be the cock of the walk, part of the tribe that's in control, and then the next you are running for your life, because circumstances have changed. And how do people deal with that? And I think because it's told through the lens of children, it makes it that much more terrifying. You know, it's like how can a 12-year-old be capable of murder? Well, here it is laid bare in a Nobel Prize for Literature winning novel. And in the, again, spoiler, in the end they get rescued. And I'll be honest, I've never been more relieved to get to the end of a book and have that sort of outcome, because you get sort of, you know, halfway through it and things have all started to fall apart already. And you think to yourself, is this going to have a happy ending? And if it's not got a happy ending, then it's going to have a terrible ending. And how do you have a terrible ending with a load of kids?
Yep.
Is it going to be, are they left there? But would that be the best thing for them, or is everybody going to get murdered or killed by each other? So it's and it's stuck with me all these years. It genuinely has. It's a marvelous novel. It's a wonderful novel. I know that I've probably not I've probably not sold it very well. It's definitely worth a read if you've never read it, or you read it a long time ago. It's worth reading again as an adult, because it's very, very clever, really well written, and very, very dear to me, and in my top 6.
There you go. What's interesting is obviously that was probably not obvious, but Golding wrote it because he read a book. I can't remember the name of the book, but he read a book that was about stranded kids. Yeah. And he was like, this is crap. He goes, this doesn't represent what it would be like if kids were really stranded, so I'm gonna do it myself. And so that's what he did. It's interesting to me, this the kind of the tribalist aspect of this book, and sort of how it reflects on today's culture, I think. Because you could almost, view, social media, Twitter, as the island that we're all stuck on, getting into our tribes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I mean, it is frightening. I mean, my son's a toddler, and hopefully, fingers crossed, hopefully he never has to deal with anything like this. But you like to think that by the time that he gets to that sort of age, certainly the age of the kids in the book, that things might be different, particularly in the Wild West of social media. But I agree. I completely agree, because I think when I read it, obviously social media didn't exist. And the
good old days.
The good old days, the days, when everything was in sepia mode, and we had chariots and things like that. We literally had tablets, not electronic ones. But it felt very much like a work of fiction, because you didn't have that plane, you didn't have that sort of unsupervised a element to your life, to your school life, that kids potentially have now. I mean, that's the thing, and it's an it's interesting how it's kind of come round. It's interesting how that tribalism has, you're right, has sort of manifested itself again when it perhaps didn't 10, 15, 20 years ago, when that sort of platform wasn't there for it. I mean, what I should say, that cover actually that you've put there, I mean, I think that looks quite jovial for a book that has very, very joy in it.
It's like, oh, this looks fun. There's lizards and butterflies.
I'd read it. I'd pick it up if I didn't know what it was. And then you're like, oh, right, okay. That's the Lord of the Flies, right? Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Remarkable.
A comment we have a comment here that asks, Jimmy's Benmore asks, was there a particular character that you identified with as a young reader?
I think probably Piggy. Yeah, I think Piggy. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a lot of people that wouldn't say Piggy, because I think Piggy's the most memorable character throughout it. Piggy represents the vulnerability of humanity. He can't do anything on his own. Or if he can, he refuses to, or he doesn't feel confident enough to do it, and he loses his glasses, takes a tumble off the cliff and things like that, and he's washed up washed away into the froth. And I think we're all. I think that's probably a deliberate part on William Golding's. It's how I always interpreted it, is that, if you can ever relate to any of these characters, and it's difficult to do so, I guess, because they're kids. First and foremost, it's a very, very extreme set of circumstances and a scenario that they find themselves in, and I think Piggy is there to be our eyes and ears.
Yes,
he's there to represent what would you actually be like on this island in this kind of scenario, because I know that I would be completely helpless. I'm not the type to take hold of the conch and start laying down the rule of law, and because quite frankly I don't have the confidence to do something like that, and I would be the first off the cliff to do something like that, because that's what I'm like. And I think The weird thing about it as a novel is that actually there isn't a great deal of relatability to it because it's such a specific set of circumstances.
Mm,
I know that it's a sort of wider allegory for society as a whole,
yes.
but you know what it's like when you sit down and you read literature is that invariably and it's the same with movies, TV shows, and stuff like that. And it's one thing that actually I've always done with my friends is that, and colleagues as well, actually, is that we invariably cast shows and movies with each of us in group chats and stuff like that. So, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Star Trek,
Right.
all of these things. You can't really do that with Lord of the Flies, and it's not really that. Nobody's ever gone, right, come on, let's get this done. Let's cast everyone from Lord of the Flies.
Yeah.
But that's a very deliberate thing, and I think Piggy is probably, I don't want to say that he's a caricature of vulnerability.
Yeah.
But he is, I guess, all the vulnerability elements of it are rolled into Piggy, and that's what he represents. He's your eyes and ears in otherwise a world that's so alien and so extreme, but it has to be to tell the story. It has to be to tell the literal narrative of the book, but also what William Golding's trying to say here in that, if you leave people up to their own devices, there's going to be bother, there's going to be trouble, and violence begets violence, and invariably there's going to be that conflict. So I think in a roundabout sort of way, while he might be a caricature, Piggy, I still think he's probably the most realistic character in all of it because of that, because of those vulnerabilities, and because he's there, and he's got. I mean, we were shown there's a film adaptation of it. There might be a couple of film adaptations of it, but the one that I remember is, I think, from the late 50s, early 60s, and it's black and white. And we got shown it because they did that in class, to sort of break up the brutality. They would visualize the brutality. And the bless him, the actor that was doing it, he was chewing the scenery, something terrible. And I know that's terrible to say because he probably was a 12-year-old kid at the time. Coming from, a world-renowned actor like myself. But it was the way that he said that he had asthma. He used to go, "I've got asthma, I've got asthma," and of course that became a catchphrase for the whole year to say that. But again, that's it's rang a bell with something's rang a bell with it, and I remember it 20 plus years later having read it. So it's good question though.
Yeah.
Did I answer it? I can't remember.
I think you did. Who would you relate to? And it's Piggy, and it's true. I think books like this and stories like this particular, I think all stories need some sort of vehicle that kind of gets you into that world. I mean,
Absolutely.
I think of even something like fantastic Star Wars, like Luke Skywalker is us. He is just the normal average dude who goes on the adventure. And this is it's even with something as crazy as this. You need something to kind of let the reader be grounded in something.
Absolutely.
James also says that Piggy was the character that he identified with the most as well. So I think you're onto something. Piggy is the eyes and ears of the reader.
Absolutely.
Another comment that we have is from Frank, says thoughts on the Lord of the Flies episode of The Simpsons.
Das Bus. Fantastic. Wonderful. Das Bus. My favorite line in it, my favorite line in the whole episode is right at the end when they have James Earl Jones, who obviously must have been in another studio doing something else, and they've said, "James, come on in." But of course, he'd been in it previously. I think I might be right in thinking that he's one of, if not the first, guest star, because he's in the first Treehouse of Horror, I think.
Yes.
And he did it loads and loads of times throughout the series. And my favourite line in Das Bus is at the end, as the shot pans away from the island that they've been stuck on. He says, "And the children learned to live in a functional society, and then they were rescued by, let's say, Mo." And every time it cracks me up. Every part of that little line, who's saying it, the end of this absolutely bonkers episode, who it is that's going to end up rescuing the kids, every part of it, I love that episode. It's terrific. It's wonderful stuff. Wonderful stuff.
Love it.
Interestingly, actually, talking about the X-Files, I just remembered actually. In the 90s, there was an X-Files comic or X-Files magazine. It might have been a magazine actually, and it had a comic in it. So it was a bit like Doctor Who magazine and stuff like that. And it was, I think, Marvel. I think they were from Marvel. I think Marvel collected them. And I distinctly remember getting, because I couldn't watch the show and because it was super popular, I was allowed to get the magazine every now and then, if, whatever, Saturday afternoon or something, and I had extra pocket money. And I remember distinctly one edition that had a comic in it that was a sort of play on Stand By Me, with the kids. The kids discover something in the forest, and then one of the kids ends up shooting another kid, and Mulder goes in, and he ends up getting attacked and stuff. And then the last few panels is Mulder recovering in a hospital, and he's reading a copy of Lord of the Flies. So there you go. Everything. It's almost as if this is scripted. It's almost as if we know what we're talking about, Luke. Right? Is that?
It's all connected somehow. It's
That's
it's the way it is. So there we go. Lord of the Flies. That is a great book to have with you while you're stranded somewhere.
Absolutely.
The next thing in your list is the film Heat.
It is.
So this is an interesting one. It's also a long one, so it gives you plenty of time to kill.
It does.
So first, just run through, what is it about Heat that makes this a film you're like, yep, if I can only pick 3 films to watch forever, Heat is one of them. Why?
I would say, now I'm probably going to contradict this even within the next little while in the show, maybe even still contradict it talking about Heat, but I would say shot for shot, pound for pound, line for line, it's pretty much as close to a perfect movie as you can get for me, but for a lot of people as well. And there's a reason that Heat, being the age that it is still on TV. It's still talked about. It's still got me talking about it and getting excited about it, and even seeing the poster there, getting excited looking at it. I rewatched it in preparation, or over the Christmas period in preparation for coming on the show, and it's one of these movies that no matter when I sit down to watch it, or if I catch it on TV, or I'm sitting down to watch the whole thing, it will never go off. It doesn't get turned off, and it's one of these few movies. And I think we were chatting about it. I think we've chatted about it previously. That you are completely hooked by the story, by the performances, even though you've seen it 1,000 times.
Yeah.
I know how it ends. Of course, I know how it ends. I know the plot. I know the twists. I know what happens to every character. I know their background. I know everything about this film. I even know all about the production elements of it because I love it so much, and I can't get enough of it. But I don't turn it off. I'm totally hooked when I turn it on, and from that opening scene of the train approaching the track, going up the tracks, and you've got the credits rolling at the side. I'm hooked. I'm totally hooked. I'm completely immersed in that world for the next 3 hours, and I will not come out of it until I finish it. And it's the weird thing about it is, it's Al Pacino, it's Robert De Niro, it's Val Kilmer, it's Ashley Judd, it's Hank Azaria, you know all these people, all these character actors, and you know how great they are, and you know that they're acting, but they're not acting. They're Vincent Hanna, they're Nick McCauley, it's a movie that transgresses cinema because it's just pure storytelling and proper lightning in a bottle stuff with the cast, with the writing. I mean, the writing it makes me weep how good it is. Michael Mann, obviously, I think you would be hard pressed to find anyone. Heat was out in 95, I think. 95. I think you would be hard pressed 2, 3, 4 years before and after to find someone who was doing as good work as Michael Mann, and in particular with Heat. Because I think it's a masterpiece. I genuinely think it's a masterpiece. I think it's a masterpiece of cinema. I think it's a wonderful masterpiece of mid-90s Hollywood, actually. One gripe that I've heard people have is with the ending. I think some people find the ending to be a bit too Hollywood. Again, without sort of going into too many spoilers, but
we can go into spoilers on Heat. That's fine. Spoilers abound, everyone.
So the in the end, there's a shootout between Vincent Hanna, Al Pacino's Vincent Hanna, the cop, and Robert De Niro's Nick, who's the crook who's trying to escape, and they're at the airport and stuff like that. And Vincent Hanna gets the upper hand, and he shoots Nick, and then he holds his hand as he dies, because it's a mutual respect for both of them for what they do, that's built up across the last 3 hours worth.
Yeah.
And also it's Pacino and De Niro on at that time on screen at the same time. And one of the criticisms that I've heard quite a bit actually is that that's a bit too Hollywood. You know, should De Niro have got away, or should De Niro have killed Pacino and then got away, and things like that? And actually, do you know, I've thought about this, and I do agree with it to a certain degree. I agree with it in the sense that, yes, it is very Hollywood, because it's the old good versus evil, and good triumphs over evil, and even though we've got, you know, very, very ambiguous characters who are very much grey, not black or white.
Yeah.
I do agree with it. However, I still think it works. I still think it works really, really well, because it just feels natural. It just feels like a natural. It just feels like a natural end to it, you know.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, how do you end a movie like that? You know, how do you end a 3-hour 90s crime thriller like that? How else would you end it? You don't want it to end. You never want it to end, but it's got to, because it's 3 hours and what have you. So, yeah, it's interesting. It's a great movie. I mean, I saw it. I think I saw it for the first time when I was maybe about 14, 15.
Oh wow.
And I watch it all the time. I watch it. I probably don't watch it enough for my liking. I just love it. I love the look of it. You know, I love their suits. I love how LA is portrayed. You know, I love all the kind of mythos that goes along with it. How Michael Mann wrote it after seeing I think the painting's called Pacific Man, and it's the shot. He replicates the shot in the movie of the apartment that overlooks the Pacific.
Oh right. Okay. Yep.
I love all that. I just love it. I love it. And interestingly, I actually don't think I've enjoyed any of Michael Mann's work since. weirdly enough, I've certainly not enjoyed it as much as I enjoy Heat. But I you know, Collateral I know is quite good, but
I do like Collateral.
It's been a long time since I've watched it. It's been a very, very long time since I watched it. And funnily enough, it came up on Twitter. The sort of it was like a backstage sort of practice of Tom Cruise and Jamie Foxx in the taxi, and they're rehearsing scenes, and then it shows you the final product of it. And actually, that looked really good. And I thought, you know, I should probably give it another go. I don't think I've rewatched it since I saw it in the cinema.
Tell you what, go rewatch it, and we'll come back and talk about it another time. I like Collateral. I like Collateral. There's a couple comments in the here. Bay Tales, hello Bay Tales, says the sequel novel was really interesting. I don't know if you've read that. Have you read it?
For my shame, I've not actually, and that's to do with me being mid-transatlantic when it came out and being far too lazy to go and get it. I'm also worried about it. There is no degree of worry about it, because I understand that it's Heat 2 is both a prequel and a sequel, all in one book, and I'm worried that it's like, so I'm just, as a very, very quick aside, I hate watching last episodes of shows that I really like, so I avoid watching them. So Peep Show on Channel 4, loved it, watched it for years. Haven't seen the last episode because I don't ever want it to end, and if I don't watch the last episode, it never will end.
True.
And what's another episode, right? What's so I don't know. So no spoilers and stuff like that. Extras is another one.
Oh, that was great.
Can't watch it. Can't bring myself to watch it because I don't want it to ever finish. And I'm a little bit like this with Heat. And I've heard rave reviews. It's not like, you know, it's been badly reviewed or anything like that. Far from it. But I'm just so worried that if I go down that rabbit hole, because because I hold the movie in such high regard, that it's either never going to live up to those expectations, and to surpass those expectations would take an awful lot. Yeah. And it's all me. It's not Michael. It's me.
Yeah, I know. I get that. To go back to your comment about gripes about the ending of the movie, and it's funny because we're talking about the ending before we're talking about like the beginning and the middle. But the only gripe I had about the ending, it has nothing to do with them holding hands and him being that actually didn't bother me. I was fine with that. It sort of made sense. It was kind of, it was poetic. I get what they were doing. What I didn't like is that scene where Robert De Niro comes out of the hotel. He's hit the fire alarm. All that stuff's going off. His girlfriend is in the car looking out at him. And Al Pacino clocks this and then goes running after him. Right. Yep. There was this moment where Al Pacino totally and utterly loses Robert De Niro's character, loses him entirely. He's just gone.
Yeah.
And the next scene we see is Robert De Niro jumping down the bushes, and he's running to the airport. And then 3 seconds later, Al Pacino's right behind him. I'm like, how the hell?
I know. But that's it, though. But that's Hollywood, right? That's
it is.
That's it. And you're absolutely right, because up until that point, everything's been so watertight.
Yes.
And deliberately so, to the point where,
yes,
arguably, there's been moments of, lengthy moments of no dialogue. Like there's the scene earlier on where the gang are breaking into that building, and you've got Al Pacino and all the cops in the trucks watching them.
That's a good scene.
And it goes on. I mean, there's that stare, there's that sort of neon stare from De Niro, and it, the shot remains, and it remains, and it remains, and it's like, we get it, Michael, we get it, right? We get he's clocked it, but, and then you're right, it's nobody's nerfed, as they say.
No. I mean, in terms of like continuity things, that's one of the only things that I picked up on, because we watched it the other day to kind of get it fresh in my mind, and that was the only thing that really stuck out to me in terms of problems with the story. Now, other things. Let me pose a few things to you. How did you feel about the? There's an interesting relationship between men and women in this film. It's interesting that both De Niro and Al Pacino are basically two sides of the same coin. They're just one's on the good side, one's on the bad side, but they both have kind of damaged lives, damaged relationships, things like that. What do you think that? Trying to phrase it the best way. Do you think those relationships were as fleshed out as they could have been for a film that's 3 hours long?
No, is the short answer. Because you're right, it's 3 hours. There's a phrase that kicks around the internet these days called dad movies. And this is one of them, right? And this is probably one of the more cerebral ones of them, because dad movies include things like Commando and the Rambo trilogy. There's 5 Rambos now, isn't there? And RoboCop, the original, and Total Recall. And there's a theme growing here of the actors that star in dad movies, as you can probably gather.
Yeah.
And Heat is on the more, dare I say, intellectual end of this, because it's probably branded in there with things like Ocean's 11, which is kind of, male, manly, testosterone-fueled action. So, for example, the shootout scene in Heat is used in. It has been used in the nearly 30 years since, as an example, by like riot police and stuff like that in the States or all over the world, as like how these things that's how accurate it was,
Yeah.
And in answer to your question, you're absolutely right, because it's fleeting moments between the sequence, the plot.
Yes.
And you're right, because again, I like you, I watched that again, and I did think that.
Yeah.
I did think that, and it's amazing how a movie like this, with its reputation, has that. I mean, Natalie Portman's character, for example, she's this clearly very, very damaged young girl.
Yeah.
But that's all she is.
Yeah.
That it's like every time she's on screen, she's either really, really sad or she's full of anxiety. And it's like, even Natalie Portman at whatever age she was much more capable an actress to do more than just be like that. And I get it. I get that. I mean, it was released in 1995, and unfortunately, the world wasn't quite as aware of what it should potentially be doing when it comes to storytelling in that respect. I mean, Ashley Judd, for example. Ashley Judd's fantastic in it.
Yes.
Ashley Judd's really, really great in it. But again, at times she's just reduced to the moaning wife. And actually, she's actually just a plot device, isn't she? Because
fortunately,
she's having the affair with Hank Azaria's character, who in turn is who leads Al Pacino and the cops to the gang. So, and she is wonderful in it. I mean, she shines in it every time she's on screen, and she plays it really, really well. And she's Val Kilmer, obviously. But the part quite easily could have just been written off as Val Kilmer's partner.
Yes.
And that's not. It's not. it's not how things are done now, or you like to think that it's not how things are done now. And I agree with you. I think it's a long movie that could have afforded a lot more of that.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate. It is unfortunate that there isn't that element to it. Unfortunately, yeah.
I think in terms of my gripe, so that's probably my biggest one with it, with given the runtime and things like that. But I totally agree with you in terms of like the visual style, and the dialogue, and it is one of those movies where even there's some bits that sometimes kind of feel like I'm a little bit lost, but at the same time, I'm still invested in what they're talking about. There's definitely something that is constantly gripping about this movie. So I do get why it has maintained its kind of status as a great as a great crime movie of the 90s, great gritty crime movie. But I think those would be the only thing. I think I would, if I could go back in time and say, okay, Michael Mann, I'm gonna fix your story. Because that's the kind of person I am. I would say, look, add just a bit more depth to the ladies, and I would say, you know what, dial back some of the other police characters, and give them like one or two that are more that are a little bit more deep as well.
Yeah. It is busy for that. There's a scene. Again, I thought this watching it the other night. There's a scene. It's the scene after Al Pacino it's the nightclub scene, and he gets the tip off as to who one of the robbers might be, one of the gang might be, and he's then on the phone in the club, and he's talking to the whole the squad room, and it's like, who's there? And it's like they're all there, and they literally, as actors, have to reach over to get phones and things like that. And I remember thinking, that's a really busy scene. There's an awful lot of characters going on there. There's an awful lot of, there's a lot of movement on the screen there, literally, as actors within the context of the set, having to lean over each other to get on with it. And I guess, that probably would have happened in a squad room in the 90s for a case like this.
Yeah.
But you're right, at the end of the day, it's still Hollywood. It's still a film. It's still a 3-hour, it's still a work of fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge cast. It is a massive cast. It's a massive cast that seems to constantly get bigger. I mean, the poster there, the poster of the cops.
Yeah.
That's the bit, again, within the context of the movie, that De Niro's switched it so he's now observing the police. Like the guy up the top right, so there's 5 of them there. The guy up the top right, I think's only got like maybe 5 lines of dialogue over the course of the whole movie, and that's it. But he's there in one of these. He's on the poster, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Even the poster is too busy. It's so busy that Al Pacino's on it twice. You know what I mean?
Oh God, it's true. It's true that I tell you what was interesting though about the film as well is the whole time I was watching it, I kept feeling like I was getting the Dark Knight vibes, right?
Yeah.
So my knowledge of Heat and the impact of it on cinema is as Watson would say of Sherlock, nil, right? So I was doing a little bit of research about it, and I saw that Chris Nolan took inspiration from Heat for his, and I was like, that really made so much sense. From the moment where they whatever they go after that truck, the truck with the important information inside. The moment they kind of do that heist was very much reminded me of the Joker and the bank and the school buses and all that kind of stuff. And those that shot in the Dark Knight where the truck is flipped over. It all sort of it felt very much like that. So that was quite interesting to me to see those connections, and that Van Zandt is also the bank guy.
Of course, absolutely. Always plays a baddie. His name escapes me, but it always plays a baddie. He's even a baddie in Armageddon.
God, it has been probably decades since I've seen Armageddon. I don't even remember him being in it.
He ends up with a. I think Bruce Willis has him with a set of pliers around his neck at one point. In Armageddon, which is probably the most Armageddon thing, and Jerry Bruckheimer thing that anybody's ever said on the internet. So there you go.
Yes. A couple of comments. Chief Brody Rules says that The Dark Knight lifts too much from Heat. Maybe. In
Possibly.
terms of an overbloated runtime.
Yeah, possibly. I'd say I'd agree with that. Yeah.
That didn't need to be that long. He also asks, have you seen L.A. Takedown that Michael Mann made first before Heat?
I've not seen it all. I've seen bits of it here and there over the course of the years. That was after his work on Miami Vice, I think. I've always meant to sit down and watch. I've seen bits of it over the course of time, but it's one of those things that, you know, it's just, there's too much to watch and so little time.
True.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that I've never really enjoyed anything else that he did.
Yeah,
and the thing is, I'm not, you know, I know that like I said earlier on, that is me. I know that it's just, for whatever reason, it's just never lived up to Heat, and it's, you know, when I watch Heat, I'm seeing the zenith of someone's work.
Yeah.
And yeah. But yeah, I've always meant to sit down and watch it. I haven't watched the Miami Vice movie either, with Jamie Foxx and Colin Farrell.
Colin Farrell. Yeah. I
wouldn't be Colin Firth. He was Colin Firth. I would have watched that. You know, I would have tuned in for that car crash. But yeah.
Yeah.
No.
So that thing that sort of concludes Heat. I think it's an interesting choice. It's a good choice. It will keep you entertained. There's a lot to unpack from it. So, you know, whether the things that are really strong about it, the things that you might want to improve, but it's definitely a good choice. Back to books. This is really interesting to me because I didn't even know that this was a book until you mentioned it.
Okay.
But you've picked 2001: A Space Odyssey. Tell me about this as a book.
Certainly. I actually had that version. That's the version that I had. Again, this was on our school reading list, I think. Either first year or second year, so about 13, 14 maybe. And I read it. So everyone knows the movie, obviously. Everybody's familiar with the movie and the Stanley Kubrick masterpiece. And Arthur C. Clarke, as far as I'm aware, helped with the movie. You know, he was part of the screenplay. He was an advisor on set and stuff like that. And Arthur C. Clarke himself is a universally renowned and revered science fiction writer. Part of that old school, you know, very much the kind of 50s, you know, along with Asimov, you know, these guys who sort of shaped what science fiction and very much science fiction could become, you know. And again, I remember reading this book and thinking it's absolutely bonkers. The book itself, I think, the story makes more sense than I think the movie does.
Okay.
And I think it's because you're afforded the time to digest everything that's going on. So, you know, the movie very famously has the opening sequence of the apes.
Yes.
With this sort of, you know, enigmatic
monolith
that triggers the next stage of development. It's an alien computer that triggers the next stage of human development. And then obviously chucking the bone up and that becoming the satellite and things like that. Now that's a whole, you know, that's maybe the first 3-4 chapters, I think, maybe even more. And it goes a lot more into the sort of, again, tribalism of the two tribes and of the monkeys and things like that, the apes. And again, it's given a bit, you know, the characters are named. And when the monolith finally does its thing, it kind of makes more sense, you know, and it's not quite as trippy. I always think it reads a lot better than the movie plays out. And I know that that's sacrilege because the movie's so revered. But again, one of these books that I read obviously very, very young and then read again when I was older. So I think I was maybe about 20, 21 when I read it again. And there are 3 sequels to it. And I just devoured a lot of them. And interestingly, actually, I think with the sequels, they feel like sequels. You know, this feels like a sort of seminal piece of work. You know, it says on that cover, they're the greatest science fiction epic of our time. Now, that obviously is up for debate. That's fine.
Because obviously it's Star Trek the motion picture.
Listen, it's no Star Trek the motion picture. It's not even Journey Home. Is that 4? What is the one with the whales? Is that the 4th?
Yes, the Voyage Home. The Voyage Home.
Voyage Home. Sorry, Voyage Home. It's not even that. You know, let's get this straight, okay?
I love that whale movie. God damn it.
Yeah, it's the sequels. The sequels to this read like sequels. You know,
Right.
they don't have the same. I don't think they have the same weight. They're still good reads. That you know, but they feel more like beach reads. Weirdly, they feel more like beach reads because there's a lot of characters and they play a lot to what happened, and there's a lot of kind of cameos from
Yeah.
characters that should be dead or are dead for all intents and purposes. And I mean, inherently they are readable, but you know, I don't think they're ever hailed as amongst Arthur C. Clarke's sort of pantheon of literature. But the original's fantastic. Again, it's left a sort of lasting imprint on my imagination.
Yeah.
And I was so glad that I did. I'm so glad that I read it again as an adult because you know it's like when you're a kid.
Oh,
You know, one of the
definitely.
reasons that I probably read it was the only sci-fi. I love sci-fi. And it was the only sci-fi book that was on the reading list of like, you know, a dozen books that you had to read to review and you know, read it and all the rest of it. And then went back to obviously as an adult and was able to appreciate it more in terms of the writing. I mean, the ideas in it are fantastic. You know, the ideas and the execution are absolutely fantastic. And it's a good read. It's a really good read. One of those books that I think, one of those books that's maybe been crushed by its own success.
Sure.
In the sense that how could you ever read it and compare, you know, you invariably compare it to the movie because the movie's iconography is embedded in all of our imaginations now. That's just the nature of it, as a lot with Kubrick's work. But particularly, I think 2001: A Space Odyssey and you know the Blue Danube and things like that. So it's worth a read to read just as a book, just as a sci-fi book, and then I'll be honest, I can't say it sort of, you know, it didn't quite give me a lightning bolt moment to read more Arthur C. Clarke. I don't think I've read any other Arthur C. Clarke, but I appreciate the weight of the man's genius, you know.
Yeah. Did you watch the film before you read the book or read the book first?
I think I'd seen parts of the film.
Mm-hmm.
So this would have been what, the late 90s, early 2000s, and invariably, you know, again, there's various Simpsons parodies of it.
One question in the chat is, what is your favorite 2001 reference in The Simpsons?
You know, it's endless. It's endless. Again, everything's connected.
Mm-hmm.
I distinctly remember watching the film, eventually getting around to sitting watching the film, and going like, all right, that's that Simpsons reference, isn't it? That's the, you know, that's that bit from Lisa's Pony, you know, that's got the same intro and stuff with the apes, and going, oh yeah, that's that bit. Oh, that's what it's from. It's the first movie I watched that had an intermission. It's the first film that I ever watched that if I was watching a DVD and it's got like a 10-minute intermission, and it's just intermission on the screen. And I thought, that's quite quaint, isn't it? I think I had it in video or DVD or something like that, and invariably skipped it. But
how long is the movie? I don't remember.
I don't. There'll be various. If it's on TV, it won't have the intermission because it's a 10-minute intermission with you know, with classical music playing as an intermission would be. Right.
Yeah.
But it's the first whatever version that I eventually got around to watching it. It had the intermission in it. I was like, oh, this is a nice little throwback. My God, you need it. You know, don't get me wrong. You need that intermission.
We need it with some movies nowadays. Let's be real.
Well, true, very true. Sometimes the intermission should come before the movie starts these days. We won't get into that, shall we?
No, I agree. So what's interesting to me is, so we're kind of at like the halfway point here of these picks. So I'm interested to know how did, you know, reading things like 2001, watching things like Heat, things like and reading Lord of the Flies, how did this stuff sort of impact you as a writer? And in addition to that, what kind of triggered you to, you know, take up the pen and want to be a writer?
I think I've always loved a good story. I've always loved a good yarn. I've loved telling a good story. I love hearing a good story. You know, I know that certainly was one of the reasons that I became a journalist. And I mean, I've always written. I've always written fiction. When we went on holiday, you know, I wasn't allowed to take my Star Wars action figures or my Lego or anything like that on holiday with me. So what I would do is when I was on the week or 2 weeks or whatever it was, I would sit and write stories to then act out with my action figures and Legos and all the rest of it when I got home. And I would, and on reflection on that now, that clearly was a passion for telling stories and portraying those stories.
Same.
And I think with all these picks, maybe less so with the Lord of the Flies, but certainly 2001: Space Odyssey and Heat. You know, at the heart there is a great story there. You know, and they are masterfully told by those who make it. And I guess there's always been that striving on my part to replicate that, to want to capture that line in the bottle, to be able to tell the story in a way that is revered as much as these things are by so many people. And it's something that I think with my own writing, I'm very aware of, or I try to be very aware of, because at the end of the day, you know, being an author, being a writer, and you know this yourself, Luke, it's about telling a story. You're just a storyteller. You know, that's all it is. It's all made up. You know, you've made all this stuff up. It's you're putting across a story. You're telling a story, hopefully through a medium of, you know, great characters, fantastic settings, subplots, all that other stuff. That you know, clouds the water a little bit. At the end of the day, if you don't have the good story to tell, then, you know, invariably it might not be enjoyed. So I think this, particularly the picks that have come, and certainly the picks that we've still got to come, they are an ode to that enjoyment of a good story, of a good yarn, and being told it and enjoying it and losing yourself in it as well. I mean, you know, we talked about it with Heat. I get completely sucked into that universe, and I don't ever want to leave it. And that's, you know, the weird thing about being a writer is, and again, you'll know this yourself, is that you become fiercely critical of everything when it comes to fiction, when it comes to movies and TV shows and stuff, and you invariably fall into that. I do a lot of creative writing workshops and teaching of it, and I call it the writer's mentality.
Yeah.
So, and I teach, you know, I say that to my students. I say, look, you know, if you want to write a cozy crime, for example, if you're working on a cozy crime novel, read cozy crime that you enjoy, but don't sit and lose yourself in the story. Read the first 5 chapters and go, right, okay, what did the author do in those first 5 chapters? How did they do it? And, you know, that's how this is done.
Yeah.
You know, but invariably the cost of that is that you can't turn it off. You know, you end up reading and reading and everything and watching things with a critical eye and going, all right, okay, well, that's how they did that. All right, maybe I could do that. And I think with these picks, and that's what's great about having to sit down and pick 6 3 books, 3 movies for the show, is that it has to have that really, really high level of immersion.
Yes.
That you never lose. And Heat's exactly like that. 2001: Space Odyssey, obviously the sort of chaos of the island on Lord of the Flies is exactly the same. And you know, I'm maybe portraying it too much as a bad thing, but it's part of the job, right? It's part of the job of being a writer, is that you have to have that sort of critical eye and be able to appreciate these things. But I think it makes these picks in particular and films and books, it makes them all the more special because you almost get a break from that critical analysis of the creative process, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I'm definitely with you on all of that, especially that I am. Oh God, I'm so critical. It is.
It's hard though.
Yes.
It's hard to switch off. It's
It is.
really hard, particularly if it's something really good, you know.
Yeah.
Because invariably you go, well, I can lift that. I can do something like that. You know, I can at least try to replicate it. You know, it's difficult, and it's an homage, I guess. It's an homage to good storytelling, and we all want to be better storytellers, right?
Of course we do. Of course we do. Okay, so let's jump back into your picks, and I've already jumped there. Next film, Ghostbusters.
Yes.
What a pick! I was very happy that this came on, because I love Ghostbusters. That is a great movie.
Yeah.
But it's not about my opinion; it's about your opinion. So, tell me about your kind of introduction to Ghostbusters, its influence on you. Why is Ghostbusters on this list?
Certainly. I have very, very early memories. Amongst my earliest memories is of having the 4 Ghostbusters action figures.
Mhm.
Now, these would have been from the cartoon, the real Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
And then invariably, my parents getting me a video of it and what have you. And it's probably the first. It's certainly the first piece of sort of geek culture, or what you nowadays you call geek culture, that I can ever recall and being a part of it, because I could not get enough Ghostbusters stuff.
Yeah.
And you're talking about me being maybe 3-4 years old, so late 80s, early 90s. I was born in 86. It was out in 84, I think, 83, 84.
Yes, 84. Yeah, yeah.
The second one's out in 89. So again, it was everywhere. It was that sort of, that ghost, that logo was everywhere. And I remember it. I can't shake it from my memory. And I loved it growing up as a child, and I loved the fantasy of it, and I loved the idea that you had this fourth emergency service that would go out and catch ghosts. Now, I've said this before, I am the biggest scaredy cat that you will ever likely to meet, to the point where I can't even bring myself to watch horror films. I've never watched The Exorcist, although I'm aware of it, obviously, and all that. Never watched that. I can't very rarely get past the opening credits of Halloween because of the music. I can't do it. I
gotta be honest, man. Halloween is not scary. I hate that movie so much. I'm so. I know there's people in the chat who love it, but it is not scary. It is so dumb.
It's ingrained in me from, again, being very, 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 very young, and I just can't do. But I am genuinely, I'm frightened of my own shadow. Again, I think I've said this, as I've got a record talking about this. I still turn the light on in a room before I go into it, just in case there's a vampire or something like that. And it's the light with the and it's very, very specifically that thing. It's like, if there's a vampire in the corner, if I turn the light on, then they'll crumble to ash or what. That still goes. I'm 36 years old. I still do it. I did it last night. I'll do it tonight. It's just who I am. So to watch Ghostbusters and still love it, which has its own scary moments. The taxi driver at the end, once the containment unit's been opened up. There's the library ghost at the start when she goes.
Yeah,
terrifying stuff.
It is actually it is scary.
It's not a kids movie in the sort of traditional sense of it. Far from it, but it was. It invariably became marketed for kids, or with a child market with all the toys and things.
It's
like that.
the perfect kids movie because it's not for kids.
Total fantasy, total fantasy. But I always wanted to be a Ghostbuster, right?
Oh, yeah.
Always wanted to be a ghost, and again, no small part of me still wants to be a Ghostbuster, despite all of that, despite the terror, despite all the rest of it. And of course, in the last couple of years, you've gotten video games that put you, first person shooters where you've got your, your spinner wand and your proton pack and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that, I've waited all my life for these games, and they're brilliant. They're fantastic. So again, loved it. Loved Ecto 1. Loved all the toys. Loved Stay Puft, the Marshmallow Man. Loved the relationship between the characters, the writing of it. And then, of course, growing up, it's a student favorite. I had that very poster in my room, as a student when I was at university, and you get the subtleties of the comedy, the subtleties of the writing, the subtleties of the performances as well. Actually,
yes.
And that interaction between the three of them. I love movies. I love movies, full stop. But I particularly love movies when it becomes clear on screen, that the cast had a ball making that movie. The Lethal Weapon movies we chatted about earlier on are a really, really good example of that. Danny Glover, Mel Gibson clearly loved Joe Pesci later on. Clearly loved doing what they were doing. No,
he's great. It's great. I love it. I love it.
But and Richard Donner behind the camera. And there's a very, very great moment in Maverick, which he also directed in the 90s with Mel Gibson, where Danny Glover has a cameo as a bank robber. And he pulls the mask down, and it plays the Eric Clapton refrain. Ding ding ding.
Oh wow!
Like, is that? And then it's gone again, and it's like, but how would that even work? Because it's set 100 years previous. It's all that kind of silliness. And Ghostbusters is another example of that. It's another great example of that chemistry. I caught, funnily enough, I hadn't seen it. I'd never seen it before, but it was like a reel that Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray did together in costume outside the firehouse with Ecto 1 behind them, and it was a reel that was being sent out to cinema chains before Ghostbusters came out. It was released, and the pair of them are just riffing off each other, talking about why these cinema chains should have Ghostbusters, and it's so special to see, and it's on YouTube. But I'd never, it'd been unearthed maybe about 10 years ago for one of the anniversary DVD releases or something like that. And it's just another bit of that lore that goes in. I still use lines of dialogue in real life from the last scene, or one of the last scenes when they're explaining to the mayor about what's going on.
Yeah.
Dogs and cats living together, total pandemonium, or whatever the line is. But I say that all the time. There's another line from the second one, with when they're arrested and they're in court, and Lewis Tully, who's their accountant, says, "Oh, I'm not sure that you guys should have me representing you here in court. I got my law degree at night school." And then Dan Aykroyd's Ray Stantz goes, "Oh, that's all right, Lewis. We got arrested at night." And it's it's like that. I know that's the second one, but stuff like that just goes completely over your head. Obviously, when you're younger, and then later on, obviously within that scene, again, I know it's in the second one, when the Scaleri brothers break out of the ooze. And they've got the judge who's next to be taken away, and Lewis comes ahead. He says a fantastic dialogue about the law, and he goes, and my clients would be exposing themselves. And Bill Murray steps forward and goes, "And you don't want us exposing ourselves." I say that all the time. I say that to my wife. She's sick to the back teeth of me saying things like that within reasonable context. I know this is a family show. But yeah, just the whole lore behind it. I loved the most recent one. I loved Afterlife. I thought it was great. I know it's pretty much the same movie.
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, you'll cry at the end. Everyone I know cries at the end.
Okay.
It's heartbreaking.
The thing you're kind of hitting on, which I also want to talk about briefly, is the comedy. This film is its comedy is, I think, as you said, it's pitch perfect. I mean, I love that scene when Venkman is in Dana's apartment. And she's like, that's the bedroom. Nothing ever happens in there. And he's like, "Well, that's a shame."
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just like,
absolutely.
Oh my god,
it's not even framed on him, from what I recall. It's not even framed on him.
It's not.
He's in the background as he closes the door.
Yes,
but he's very much not the focus of what's going on. But that makes it even funnier,
Yes.
And it's full of that stuff. It's wonderful. It's wonderful from start to finish.
Yeah, and even actually just that scene right before when Dana is at the firehouse, and he's like, "Well, I'll take Miss Barrett back to her apartment and check her out, or I'll check out her apartment."
Yeah.
It's like, oh, God, I love it, and also that's the scene. There's so many good bits where Venkman comes in and he's asking, I can't remember the secretary's name.
Janine Melnitz.
Yes, Janine. He's like, any messages? Any calls? And she's like, no. And then he goes to his office, and then Han Ramis's character just emerges out from under.
Yeah. He's been under there all the time.
It's just like, this is like, it's so like risque, this movie, and kids are watching it, but they're not really getting it. But like, as you say, the older you get, the more you start to sort of appreciate it. I do. I think this is a great movie. If I had any critique or criticism of this, I think that the biggest disappointment is that Winston is so underplayed, underused. He's not even on the poster. Which is like a shame.
I was actually going to say that. That was always a gripe of mine, because Ernie Hudson, the great Ernie Hudson. Well, the role was originally meant for Eddie Murphy. And he wasn't able to do it because he'd signed up to do Beverly Hills Cop. And I don't think, like, the production was played. The production was played with a lot of problems at a higher level, and it's Paramount. Is it Columbia? Sorry, and there'd been a change of bosses and things like that. They weren't even sure that they were allowed to use the name Ghostbusters. Right up until they filmed the scene where the Ecto-1 pulls up in front of Dana's apartment right at the end, when it's all kicked off. And they were sort of forced, because there was a cartoon series called Ghostbusters from the 60s, and it was based on like sort of short movies from the 50s and 60s. It features an ape, actually, as one of the characters. I remember that. Filmation, I think it's Filmation's Ghostbusters. I think that's what they ended up being called. But they were going to call it a whole load of other names, and the production was essentially pressed into going with Ghostbusters, because at that scene when the Ecto-1 pulls up to the building, the crowd of extras who they hadn't gotten permission from New York City to close off the street. They all started shouting Ghostbusters, 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 and they were like, right, well, we can't afford to do this again, so we're just going to have to go with Ghostbusters. And and it's stuff like that, you know, all this mythos that's grown up around it as a movie, and again, part of that sort of archaic and sort of you know, anarchy fueled era of movie making in the early 80s that you just wouldn't get away with these days. You don't get away with these days, you know.
No, I agree. There's a couple of comments. Bay Tales says 1984, what a year for cinema. Ghostbusters, Gremlins, Birdie, Top Secret, This Is Spinal Tap, and so many more. I agree. The 80s and early 90s are just like perfect year of cinema.
What an era.
We were spoiled. A couple other comments. Chief Brody Rules asks, has Jonathan seen the Ghostbusters 2 set visit? There's home video footage of lucky kids who get to meet the Ghostbusters. It's so good.
I've not seen that, and I'm jealous, even as a 36-year-old man, that I wasn't allowed to go on something like that. That would be fantastic.
I'm sure it's on YouTube.
I remember going to Universal Studios in 1989, and they had the Ghostbusters live experience. I remember all of that, and I remember it was behind like, you know, it was an amphitheater, and you were inside, and they had like there was a big wall of glass of screens, and that's what they used to project the ghosts onto.
Right.
And being completely mesmerized by it, because again, I would have been 3 or something like 3.5, and I had my suit, I had my jumpsuit as well that I got with it, and I told my wife this story not that long ago. I was always really bothered by having the jumpsuit that I got because it had shorts. It was the jumpsuit that you zipped in, but it had shorts, and I hated it because that's not what the Ghostbusters wore.
Exactly.
I had to wait like another 2-3 years until someone that my mum knew from work was going over to Universal Studios, and she had to bring me back a full length suit with the sleeves and the patch on the arm and stuff like that. And the thing was, and I was still bothered by it, right? Because on the back of it, it had printed "Back off, man, I'm a scientist," which is one of the lines right at the very, very start that Venkman uses when he's being accosted by the librarian. And I thought, but they wouldn't have that.
Yeah,
they wouldn't have that on under the proton pack. So it's like,
sometimes when they're doing this marketing stuff, they're not really thinking it through.
They're not. They're clearly, just give me what they're wearing. I just want the, you know, as a 6-year-old, just
as
give
a
me
kid. That's what you want. Exactly.
Here's my money. Take it. You know, they still got my money right enough for my parents' money, I guess. But yeah, I that story came up not that long ago with my wife. She didn't know it. She thought it was adorable, but you know, a bit much. But that's me all over. Put that in my headstone.
Exactly. What's interesting, the last thing we'll say about this before we move on is it's interesting that the I didn't realize this till recently, but Ray Parker's song, he was sued by Huey Lewis and the News.
Yep.
Because he felt that Huey Lewis felt that it's plagiarized. What was the song? I want a drug. I want a new drug. Yeah. And when I read that, I was like, let's go listen to I Want a New Drug. And I was like, oh shit. Yeah. Come on. It's like you see these things nowadays.
That's the bit of history there. I don't think anyone's ever said, let's go and listen to Huey Lewis and use I Want a New Drug. Nobody in the history of music has ever said that, but there you go.
I know, right? But it's like, it's funny though, because like you hear these things like, oh, so-and-so has plagiarized Paramore, or what's that other artist that's not very good that everyone likes? Taylor Swift. And like I'll go and I'll listen to them because I'm always fascinated by that stuff. And I'll listen, I'll be like, this sounds like nothing like this. The question is,
had you heard Huey Lewis in the News, I Want a New Drug, before you knew that there was this whole legal wrangling, would you have put the two and two together? That's the thing.
Probably.
They are very similar though. And again, it was very rushed from what I recall with Ray Parker Jr. I think it was very, very rushed. I think
so.
Because again, I think a number of artists had dropped out or they weren't able to do it. And again, part of this sort of omni shambles that was the production of Ghostbusters, it was just another thing that went wrong, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think the general person probably wouldn't. I would probably catch it just because I'm really good at like catching similar sounding things. Like this was so ridiculous, but when the new Batman movie came out, the main Batman theme reminded me of this really obscure religious rapper from like 2005, because they both have the same dong dong dong
Yeah,
dong
yeah.
dong. I'm like, this is that song from 2005 from this Christian rapper. And no one listened to me, but I was like, the guy, come on, it sounds exactly the same.
Yeah.
But it was really funny. But yeah, Ghostbusters, dude, terrific pick.
Thank you.
I could watch it all night long.
Excellent.
Right. The next one is the next book, and I believe the last book.
It is. Yep.
Yes.
It is.
This is interesting to me.
Okay.
I know Star Wars and me. I know the original series, the original three, quite well. I hate the prequels and I loathe the sequels.
Yep.
But the Mandalorian's kind of fun.
Yep.
I have a couple of Star Wars books. I've never read them. They're there for maybe when I finish my PhD to one day crack them open and see what happens. So one of your top books is a Star Wars book, and that fascinates me. So what is it about Heir to the Empire? Because if I'm not mistaken, this is the next big story in the after Return of the Jedi, right?
Yeah. So that cover there has got the legends up at the top of it. So it's part of the old expanded universe, the old Star Wars expanded universe, which was completely nullified when Disney bought the movies over.
How do you feel about that, by the way?
I don't really mind. I don't. Yeah. I mean, I love Star Wars. It's as much part of my my imagination and upbringing as anything else, really. And it didn't really bother me because I think this is going to sound terrible, right? But it didn't really bother me because when the news broke that Disney bought over Star Wars, I was an adult man working a full-time job as a journalist. It wasn't sort of with a bargaining relationship.
That's all those adult men on YouTube who are very, very unhappy.
And that's it. I'm going to be trolled forever now. There we go. But I'm going on record and saying it. And I mean this in the nicest possible sense. Obviously, I mean it in the nicest possible sense. But it wasn't. It was more business news than it was personal news for me.
Yeah.
And plus, I'd enjoyed, so again, we're talking about, sorry, but don't bash my mic. We're talking about growing up in the 1990s. The 1990s, the decade of the 1990s was a barren patch for Star Wars content. 83 was when Return of the Jedi came out. Phantom Menace doesn't come out until 1999. This, I think, the early 90s is about 92, 93, I think. So this was the really first real push from Lucas.
Yeah.
And that whole world to start building upon the lore. There'd been an expanded universe book set between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back called Splinter of the Mind's Eye, I think. And I think that had been like an abandoned script for Empire Strikes Back.
It meant to be the original sequel.
That's it.
They didn't think was going to get filmed. So so I don't think it counts as canon though.
That's exactly it. So this is the Timothy Zahn. This is the first of a trilogy, and this was the first real concerted effort to build on the lore and give fans content when there wasn't any prospect of having any more movies or TV shows and stuff like that. Which is bizarre to think now when you consider that we've gone through a decade of Disney rule and we've had new content, sometimes multiple content every year. Non-stop. It's
sometimes a bit too much.
Yes, I agree. I did have funnily enough, I was speaking to my wife about this. It might have been today, actually. It might have been earlier on today, this morning, over breakfast, as we do. I don't watch the animated stuff.
Neither.
I've just, because quite frankly, I don't have the time to do it. There's series upon series and multiple episodes. I watched The Mandalorian. I watched Obi-Wan Kenobi. I watched Andor. I watched all of that. Loved it for the most part.
Yeah.
But I don't watch the cartoons, and I'm not saying that in a derogatory fashion that it's a cartoon, it's for kids and all this, because again, it's still great storytelling in parts, but it's things like there's a poster for the Bad Batch, which is the new series that's at the moment.
Yes,
one of the characters has got a bow and arrow, but it's like a laser arrow and a laser bow, and I'm like,
why?
I can't suspend my Let me watch Mark Hamill talk to 3 pounds worth of rubber. I'll believe that. I'll eat that up. I'll eat that up all the time.
Yes,
but I draw the line at laser bow and arrows, bizarrely. But
makes sense.
That's it. Anyway, this series written by Timothy Zahn, it introduced an awful lot more characters. There was a lot more depth. It was a lot more adult in terms of its storytelling.
Mhm.
Now, the reason it makes my top 3 books of all time, it's not necessarily because of the storytelling. It's not necessarily because of the way that it's written. It's the first book that I ever bought, first adult book that I ever bought with my own money. And I've still got it, actually. I meant to, I rediscovered it. Bear with me 2 seconds.
Yeah.
I rediscovered it in our move.
Oh,
still got it.
There you go.
There it is. Look at that, brown pages and all the rest of it. I daren't open it up for God knows what's still inside it. I was delighted when I first bought it. So it's 1992, copyright 1992.
Wonderful.
So it takes pride of place on my bookshelf.
Yep.
I can't believe I've still got it. I'll be honest, I can't believe it's in such good nick. But I remember getting it right, and it's not. I mean, it's only what this version's only 390 odd pages or something like that. It's not that big, but I remember getting it and thinking, "Oh my God, how am I ever going to get through this?"
Yep.
And I was on holiday at the time. It was like the Easter holidays or something, and I bought it from a John Menzies, which is no longer with us. It's now W.H. Smith, and it cost me £4.99p. £4, and again, that was a fortune. That was a fortune to me, and probably paperback. So it's probably must have been about 93, 94 that I got it. And it's always been very, very special because it was Star Wars, and that was the thing. Very foolishly, I read it at the time and skipped past all the parts of the characters that I didn't know.
Yeah. Where's Luke? Where's Leia? Where's Han?
Exactly. Where's the Han Solo bits? Where's the bit where the Millennium Falcon's flying around? So it took me years to then go back to it and read it because as I grew up, and became a teenager and had all the comics and obviously the rest of the trilogy and things like that. It's so it's very it's a pick that will always be in my top 3, more sense. So because of what it means and its own pantheon within my within my own personal history, as opposed to naturally being a all that good a book. It's still quite a good read. It's still quite a good story. There's been loads and loads of adaptations of it. I remember Dark Horse Comics, they did a version of it in the 90s, and it's a whole, like I say, it's a whole trilogy. And it's like, it is what it is. I think a lot of fans clamored for it to be the first of the sequel trilogy because it still holds its own as a sequel trilogy. But for whatever reason it didn't.
Do you think that had they done that, the sequel trilogy would have been better received?
Possibly. One of the biggest criticisms that I've had of the sequel trilogy, particularly the last one, and particularly, in fact, all of them, the films themselves play too much to their own lore. Yep. As awful as I found the prequels, they are their own story. The arguably maybe did too much of their own story within it.
Yeah.
But you sit and watch The Force Awakens, it's just A New Hope again in a different set. They've even got a giant laser. It's you've still got your Death Star assault at the end. It's the same film. The Last Jedi, I've got a bit of a mixed opinion of The Last Jedi. The bits that I enjoyed, I really, really liked. The bits that I didn't, I loathed. So the whole Casino Planet thing, I remember sitting watching that, being really excited for it, and sitting watching it in the cinema and thinking, this is the worst of the prequels' excesses. This is just designed entirely to sell toys. And it's all blue screen, and you've completely, it feels like two different movies that are jammed together. Whereas the stuff with the on the Jedi Island and then the puppet Yoda and stuff, I loved all that. I thought that was really, really good fun. And then the last one, it felt like they were chasing their tail, and the whole
Star Wars meets the Goonies.
Ridiculous. The whole art of cinema and cinematic storytelling is just completely thrown out the window. To wrap up a 40-year storytelling challenge that's had its very, very highs, but also really, really deep lows. But no, I did. I mean, I loved it. I loved all the expanded universe stuff. Even when the prequel stuff came out, obviously I was still reading it because I was a little bit older by that point, and all the X-Wing novels and it does go on a bit. Don't get me wrong. There's hundreds and hundreds of novels that are now just consigned to this legend stuff.
Yeah,
and it's it goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on, as all these things do. You know,
Yeah.
let's not forget, it's a money making exercise. You know,
Of course. Of
that's what
course.
it is.
Of course. And the other thing that's quite interesting is really for you or the general you, you make your own canon, really. You know,
Yeah,
there are certain films and books where I'm like, nope, this is the end.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
You don't count.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, I'm a big Star Trek guy, right?
Yeah.
None of the new stuff counts.
Right, okay. Well, that's good because I've not watched any of it, and no, like I love Next Generation and
Oh,
I love
yes.
Voyager.
Yes.
And again, they were on at that time in my life where I could sit
Mm.
down and watch it on a weekly basis, you know, and very, very fondly remember going to the cinema and watching First Contact and you know, I even liked Generations. I thought that was a romp and a half, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I tried watching Picard,
Oh, Picard
um,
is dog shit.
and
Um,
people are swearing in Star Trek, and I'm
oh,
like,
I hate it. I hate
that's
it.
not, you don't, why like that's the antithesis
Yeah.
of what Gene Roddenberry's vision of
Yes.
the future was.
We
You
moved
know,
beyond that. We moved beyond it. We don't need it.
they don't use money. They don't need money.
I mean,
It
arguably there
didn't work
are
for 'em.
moments
It didn't work for 'em.
in the films with Kirk and stuff like that where Kirk and Bones curse, but they're not dropping the F bomb,
They're
and
not. They're
that's
not.
what people were
I think
doing in
there's a
stuff.
degree of too much seriousness I found with it,
Yes.
particularly with Picard. It was like it was taking itself very, very seriously, and it's like,
Yes.
okay, that's fine. That's, you know, you can do that. That's allowed.
Now, I do have to say, since we're on this topic briefly on Star Trek, I am very, very, very excited for Picard Series 3.
Why is
Um,
that though?
and I'll tell you why. The new showrunner, they have a new showrunner, Terry
Right.
Matalas, the guy who did 12 Monkeys.
Yep.
He also worked on Enterprise and I think a little bit of Voyager
Okay.
back when he was a young
Yeah. Yeah.
whippersnapper. Um, he strikes me as a good dude who loves Star Trek. And essentially what he set out to do with Picard Series 3, which is the final series
Yep.
ever of Picard. They're meant to end it after this. This is
We'll
meant to
see.
be
We'll
the
see.
next generation's like undiscovered country.
Okay. Okay. It's a final
Um,
set. Well, I hope they do the signatures at the end in the credits, because
I
that's
guarantee you they will. I'm almost positive you'll see that. I've heard bits, so they're bringing back all of the music. He's teased like
wonderful.
next generation music. He's teased First Contact music. The whole
Do I
cast
need to have
is
watched
back.
the preceding two series to
Nope,
enjoy this? Because this sounds right up my street.
you don't. There's a YouTube guy named Robert Meyer Burnett who is a film dude who's worked in Hollywood for ages. He is ultra critical of Star Trek. He loathes everything that is new of it, but he has been he's been championing season 3
Okay.
because he was able to see it, a sneak peek of it. He saw the
Right.
whole thing,
Yeah.
and he was like, "Guys, I know I've been trashing on this for years.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going to love this."
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
I'm
and
sold.
yeah, so
That's
I
all it takes. That's all it takes. That's literally all it takes for me to come back to Star Trek. There you go.
yeah,
I am nothing but a shill.
yes, and you know what? The new series starts in March, so
All
I'm
right. So not long. Not long
no,
to go
not
then.
long at all now, and I'm stoked. I mean, even the design of the new ship. There's the Titan A, which is Riker's ship. He
Right.
was on the Titan. Now they've got
Of
a new
course. Yeah.
version
Yeah.
of it. It looks like it looks like a Constellation class, like the Enterprise A. It looks like
Yeah.
that sort of style. I'm like, oh, I miss seeing real starships.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Again, that was, you know, that it's interesting that you say that, look, because I think one of the things that never interested me to follow things like Discovery is
Mm,
there was always a sort of concurrent theme in the visuals of Star
yes.
Trek, and that it lacked
Yeah.
the new movies, the Kelvin timeline, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you know, it felt that it just lost that identity. And it's interesting because it happens. I mean, these types of things happen all the time, particularly with
Yeah.
modernizations of things. Is that,
Yeah.
you know, I think there's a way of continuing the visuals of something that's as old a franchise. Doctor Who's very good at it. Doctor Who's always been very, very good at it, particularly the sort of revived series, which I know is now almost 20 years old. But the like the Ice Warriors, for example, when they were brought back, like 10 years ago, they still look like a modernized version of the original ones from the 60s.
Yeah.
They weren't completely changed, and I think that was one of the things that put me off the new Star Treks. And I know that that's completely illogical, because I'm sure it's perfectly good storytelling or what have you. It will have merit. Right?
It's not good storytelling. It is genuinely some of the worst storytelling you will ever see.
All right, well,
and I'll tell you why. One of the main reasons is, you know what I loved about Star Trek initially is that it never wasted time going back on itself. It always progressed. And the minute they were like, we're going to start doing prequels, I'm like, no, I want to know what's happened after Voyager comes home. I want to know what's happened after Benjamin Sisko is stuck with the prophets in the wormhole. Like, that's what I want to see. You know, not, I don't want to see a younger Spock who's young by like 5 years.
That's it, right? That's the problem, is that you're making a new show that's set 50 years before the first show, 50 years after the first show was made, if you know what I mean. You know, the progression of technology in the real world far outweighs what it was. And so you'll never ever recapture that. You'll never ever, and there invariably will be that break. And then the worst thing is you then start getting people trying to, within the context of the show, they try and explain this away, and I always think that gets really, really ugly.
It does.
So just don't do it. Just give yourself a break. Just don't do it.
Because it makes that wonderful episode with Scotty in The Next Generation so lovely. When he goes to the holodeck and he's like, "Show me my ship." And they're like, "Specify." And he's like,
"The Enterprise." I seem to recall in typical Scottish fashion. I think he's drinking at the time. Yeah,
he is.
I didn't know that James Doohan had lost a finger. I only found that out the other day. There,
dude,
he lost a finger in the Second World War. It was shot off.
Yeah,
and I'd never noticed it before.
I never noticed it, but I remember reading about it ages ago. But you never see it.
Incredible,
it's crazy,
absolutely incredible stuff.
There you go. But yeah, anyway, I could talk about Star Trek for forever. So we will stop that discussion now, and we can do a whole nother episode on that at some other point.
Only Star Wars can get us talking about Star Trek. There you go.
It's inevitable. There's no way.
Building bridges across those two great gulfs of geekdom.
Exactly, and also because they're both in such states of disrepair.
They are. They are.
But
their glory days are long gone.
Yes, but your last pick, the last film that you have chosen, which is another very interesting franchise. That is not quite done yet, and we'll get into that. But actually, that's a good point about in terms of canon. Where is the ending? What counts? What doesn't count? But Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. God, I love this film. I love it so much. I rewatched it the other day in preparation. I loved it so much. The minute I was done, I was like, you know what? I need to buy the Holy Grail. And I went and I found the Holy Grail.
I saw it on Twitter. I saw it.
And I was like, got it. I chose wisely.
Absolutely. Absolutely that.
So, yeah. Why is this in your top?
I'm gonna put my cards on the table. All right. I'm gonna come clean. Not that I've not been coming clean over the course of the show, but I think that this is the single greatest movie ever made. There, I said it. All right. Now, it's not The Shawshank Redemption. It's not The Godfather. It's not, Seven Samurai. It's not a cinematic masterpiece by the traditional, measurement of what that means, if indeed it means anything.
Yeah.
But this is a movie that is the third of a now 5 movie franchise. You've got 2 lead actors who, for my money, are probably at the peak of their game.
Oh yeah,
they clearly get on splendidly offset. There was clearly a friendship there. There was clearly a relationship there, but also the supporting cast, right? Also the supporting cast. There is nobody on that movie that lets it down in Last Crusade. it's not an acting masterclass. It's not a masterclass in anything other than maybe a good old-fashioned romp at the cinema. And for my money, it has the best tagline in cinema history. Have the adventure of your life keeping up with the Joneses. If that's not the best, if that doesn't get bums on seats in a cinema with Harrison Ford, Sean Connery, Denham Elliott, I don't know what would. Right?
Yeah.
I really don't know what would. Again, I've got this holds a very, very special place for me. Personally, I remember my dad would rent it from Blockbuster Video or Global, and I'm talking about 50 odd weeks in a row that I rented this, and he said, I could have bought you this, Jonathan, 5-6 times over. And I said, but it's not the same. It's not the same. It has to be rented on a Friday night for me to watch it, to then have to rewind it to take it back to the talking about videotapes to take it back and all of that is built up towards this lore. Again, I can't turn it off. I've never turned it off whenever it's been on. Yeah. And it's always on at Christmas, it's always on the bank holidays and stuff like that. And to me, it's the Indiana Jones of what that franchise is all about. Raiders of the Lost Ark's probably a better film in terms of cinema and setting the tone. Temple of Doom is the Temple of Doom. And
I actually like the Temple of Doom. I'm fine.
I watched it start to finish when I was flying back from the UK in September. I was flying to Calgary, and it was on the onboard thing, and I could have watched anything, and I thought, you know what, I'll sit and watch that. It's 2 hours. Yeah, it's got the best score, I think, of all of them. I think John Williams' score for Temple of Doom, with all the incidental music that's dropped in, particularly to the main theme, I think it's got the best score compared to the lot of them. Even that poster, even looking at that poster, gets me excited.
I would do the same. I'm like, I want to watch it again, and I watched it like 2 nights ago.
The horse, the tank, holding onto the cannon, and then going off the edge, and then you've got the whole thing where they've got to get it. Then there's the Venice, there's the boat chase. It's just a great big action romp with loads of comedy, loads of heart, fantastic performances. It's not going to win an Oscar. It's not, you're not going to be, you're not. It's not going to inspire a generation of actors or what have you. But to me, it's what Spielberg cinema is all about. Yeah. And what big action, fun days out, nights out of the movies is all about. And actually, I again, with all of that and the personal stuff, it's the best film ever made.
I agree. What's interesting, as you're talking and as I rewatched it and thought about it, there is, going from Raiders to Temple to the Last Crusade. This is definitely the funniest of the three. And it, I'm not saying anything original here, but it is rooted in the relationship between Indy and his father.
Absolutely.
But what is the most fascinating to me is at no point am I watching this movie thinking, oh, this is like OTT, where if I think about a Marvel movie, it's just just the comedy fails every time. I mean, we recently all watched and did an episode on Glass Onion, and to me, none of that was funny. Nothing in Glass Onion was funny. And but then you have this movie where you have the Joneses who they both sleep with the same woman and they don't realize it.
Yeah. I was the next man. That's the line. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like, it's hilarious. And like the way Indy is just like screaming at his dad, or when Indy shoots the Nazis and he's like, look what you did.
Yeah. I can't believe what you did.
I can't believe what you just did.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wonderful. Absolutely. I've got one very, very small gripe with it.
Sure.
And it's minor. It's minor. I thought Sean Connery chewed the scenery a little bit in the fire scene.
A little bit.
When they get tied up and then they do what, Dad, what?
Yes.
That's my only gripe, because I think it just felt a wee bit too caricature, and I've always thought it.
Yes.
But it's immediately replaced by when they get into the fireplace and then they spin round and there's all the Nazis.
Yes.
And then they have to spin back round and our situation's not improved. It's a minor gripe that I've clearly not gotten over, but we'll say no more about that. But I completely agree with you. There's an organic, to use parlance of our time,
Yeah.
There's an organic energy to it. And actually, when you think about it, so it's out in '89. So they made, back then it took years to make movies. So you think about like who's involved with it. You've got Lucas and Spielberg behind the camera. You've got these two, Connery and Ford in front of it. They're all very much at the peak of what they're doing, and if they're not there yet, they're on that trajectory. So Spielberg obviously goes on to the '90s and does Schindler's List and Jurassic Park and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
They are on that trajectory, and you can tell that again. They just all loved being, the people that are involved in that movie want to be involved in it. They're glad to be involved in it with the other people who are there.
Yeah.
And it's just got this energy. It's just got this sort of boundless energy that an action movie of this caliber needs to have. And unfortunately, as you say, you look at it's interesting that you say the kind of the movie, the Marvel movies like Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy, big ensemble cast movies.
Yeah.
That I think you're right, fall flat.
They do.
They feel very forced. They feel very, very flat. But this, okay, it's not quite an ensemble cast the same way as the Avengers or all the rest of it.
Sure.
But it's got that. As I've said before, it's a great movie. It's movie making at its best.
It's
movie
character
star making movies.
Yeah, character came first.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the comedy.
Absolutely.
And the action.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the big difference between watching when I go back and watch. And this is a big thing when lately I'm going back and I'm watching a lot more old stuff.
Yeah.
And it's so refreshing because I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much character out there.
Totally.
And a lot of modern cinema and TV shows and even in literature is losing character in favor of comedy, plot, gags, that kind of stuff.
Couldn't agree more.
And this was a wonderful this film where even the opening sequence. I love the opening sequence that just it does all the things that in a way, if it was in like a Marvel movie, would annoy me. And that it tells you why he is dressed the way he's dressed, why he's got the scar, why why he's afraid of snakes. It does it all, but it does it in such a charming, fun way that is actually believable. It's like, oh, he stumbled upon these guys, and he modeled himself off of this guy. He looked up to this guy who was an adventure dude.
Do you think a lot of that might be down to the sort of process of movie making now? Like you watch that opening sequence and it's stuntmen on a train that's moving at whatever speed. It's not to say that there isn't any CGI in the Indiana Jones movies and there isn't any CGI in any movies predating, the Marvel Revolution of 2008 or whatever. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not trying to imply that. But I think for me, because you've got a stuntman can only do so much. A stuntman can only jump so high. A stuntman can only leap a certain distance to do it. And that invariably will dictate how you make movies like this.
Yes.
So invariably what you're seeing has happened. So it has a weight, it has the weight of the weight of a 12-stone man running across the top of a train that's going at 80 miles an hour. Yeah. That's there. That's what you're saying. Because I remember watching the Jurassic World. You don't really watch it; it just happens in front of you, right? That's it. And there's that awful scene where the park owner is in the helicopter.
Oh yes,
the helicopter crashes through the glass dome of the aviary.
Yeah,
and I remember sitting watching it, right, and I thought that helicopter doesn't weigh anything.
Yeah,
it doesn't exist.
Yes.
I'm acutely aware that I'm sitting watching a movie about dinosaurs that have been resurrected. I get that. Right. But when I watched Jurassic Park, and when I still watch Jurassic Park from 20 years before it,
those dinosaurs exist in that.
Yeah, exactly. Because that prop of that foot, that T-Rex foot, was dropped down by a hydraulic whatever to make the ripples in the mud because it was made. And again, there's CGI in Jurassic Park. Of course, there is.
Sparingly.
Exactly that. And that helicopter scene crashing through the dome, I just remember thinking that it doesn't weigh anything. There's no weight in what I'm looking at here. Now, again, I know that that's someone's work. I know that probably took X amounts of hundreds of thousands of dollars to make, and I'm not critiquing the work of it, but I think that as a storytelling mechanism is very, very limited. And it's something like Last Crusade, which is okay, it's set 35 years. It's been made 35 years ago, but
Mm.
when you see someone leap onto a tank from a horse that's going up a ridge, that's someone that did that. So the shot isn't impossible to do because because the character is a man who has to do that. So that's what happens, right? It's not, so I don't know.
I'm always in favor for practical. I'm always in favor of practical effects, as much realness you can get in there, which is why, for example, I do really love the first, in terms of like the Marvel stuff, the first Iron movie is very good. There's a lot of practical stuff in there. There's a lot of CGI. But I tell you what, that first moment where Iron Man lands in full suit, you feel there is a weight to him.
Totally.
And so you can do it with CGI, but a lot of films, they are so rushed and it's just spectacle that they don't really get it. But like with this movie, the tank scene, when the tank falls over and Dr. Jones, Henry thinks Indy is dead.
Yep.
And he comes walking, he climbs up and comes around, and he's so exhausted. You're exhausted with Indy because you're like, gosh, that was intense.
Yeah, absolutely. That it's a 10, 12 minute sequence that genuinely doesn't let up, and probably took months to film, but it never comes across as it took months to film, because again, you're entirely sucked into the story and you think he's gone over the I mean, I sit and watch it now and I still think he goes over in the tank.
I know, right?
I know he doesn't. Obviously I know he doesn't, because I know that it carries on for another 15-20 minutes as a film. It's a remarkable piece of storytelling. It's a remarkable piece of cinema. I still enjoy it. I'll never turn it off. I'll always champion it as being the best movie ever made, because it's because it is, quite frankly, and it's I wouldn't have a top 6 without it.
No, I think the last thing I'll say about Indiana Jones is he is, as a character, he is a hero. He is a type of hero that I think that is missing in modern day.
I agree. I agree.
And I think that's why these films continue. That's why Harrison Ford at 105 years old is doing another Indiana Jones movie, because there is just something heroic about this individual, his determination, his morals.
There's a trustworthiness to it. There's a wonderful trustworthiness to Indiana Jones as a character. Even the name, the name inspires trustworthiness. A proper moral fiber. And I thought it was great that the trailer was released for Dial of Destiny, which is out this year. I think it's out this year. I could be wrong. Anyway, it's out this year. And there's a scene in it where a Nazi gets punched in the face. Now I'm sold. Obviously, that's to me. Not only is that bread and butter Indiana Jones fodder, which I think was certainly missing from the last film. It's certainly missing from Temple of Doom. But the state of the world right now, and I saw a lot of people. Retweeting that sort of a gif of that moment, saying this is exactly the content that we need right now in 2020. Well, it would have been 2022 when it came out. And I think that's a testimony. When was the last time any of us saw anything like that for a Star Wars trailer, or a Star Trek trailer, or indeed a trailer for any Marvel movie, or indeed a trailer for any movie? When did you ever get that reaction from the populace to say, this is what we need right now? Again, it's not to get too political. It's not to talk about these types of things. I think you've hit the nail on the head with it. There is that character has been sorely missing from cinema, from storytelling, for the better part of 3 decades. Even though we've had Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which is what it is. It's no Last Crusade. Let's just leave it at that. It's no Last Crusade. But then again, what is?
What is? And I don't know about you. I would like Dial of Destiny to be good.
Yes.
The director, James Mangold, has done very good films. I love The Wolverine. I love Logan. He's done very good stuff. If I were to voice my only concern, is I am not a massive fan of Phoebe Waller-Bridge. So I'm worried about that inclusion. I'm like, I get she's gonna be Brody's. Is it Brody? What's the guy at the top?
Marcus Brody,
Marcus Brody,
it'll be his granddaughter, won't it? That's
she's gonna be his granddaughter. Like that seems obvious to me. It would have been better if it was Short Round, especially with
of course
the new revived interest
Absolutely.
in the actor at the moment. So we'll see. But I'm not a big fan of Fleabag and stuff like that. So I'm like, and I like the new James Bond movie that I know that she did a lot of new rewrites on.
A lot of rewrites, didn't she? Yeah.
That was a miss.
It wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. I'm a massive James Bond fan. I love James Bond. I love it in all forms. It wasn't a James Bond film for me.
No, me neither.
And not through any single part of it. I'm a great believer of the James Bond franchise that as the actor, you always get one movie too many. Every one of the Bond actors has been given one movie too many. George Lazenby was given
except
one
for Timothy Dalton. Except for Timothy Dalton.
Well, he was robbed of license renewed, wasn't he, in the early 90s? But Pierce Brosnan,
oh God.
Another Day. I've never seen. I said this on Twitter actually the other day. There, I said that well, we were talking about it.
We were. Yeah.
Never seen it all the way through. A View to a Kill. 50-something-year-old Roger Moore running up and down the Eiffel Tower. Don't get me wrong, I still love it. You know, I love it. It's got its massive problems, but he's too old in it. Diamonds Are Forever, too old. Sean Connery's even pushing it with You Only Live Twice. Daniel Craig, I thought he looked terrible in Spectre. And I wasn't a fan of Spectre as a film. Again, I thought it went too on and on and on and on. Yeah. And then we sit down and watch No Time to Die, and I also don't know if I was just a bit fatigued with No Time to Die because it was delayed, and it was like, this film is 2 years old by the time that we're actually going to see it for very good reason, for the best of reasons. But I kind of felt that I was watching something that even the cast weren't interested in.
Yes,
it'll be interesting. But I'm a great believer of that. As a Bond actor, you always get one movie too much. And again, don't get me wrong, I think I would feel cheated if the Bond actor didn't get that one movie that was too many. Take A View to a Kill out from Roger Moore's era, and it's like, well, but hold on, I want A View to a Kill. Don't take it away from me. I want to see a 50-something-year-old Roger Moore looking like a handbag, having women thrown at him. Because that's the thing with Roger in particular, and it happens with all the Bond actors. The older they get, the more Bond girls they get thrown at them. Bizarrely, well, it is what it is, I guess. But yeah, I want to see. I still want to see 50-something-year-old Roger Moore running up and down, chasing Grace Jones off the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah,
who wouldn't want to see that the way that I just describe it? And that is that film, which is terrible, but it is what it is. But it wasn't. No Time to Die wasn't. It wasn't.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing for me is I agree, but even for me, No Time to Die wasn't even a good bad Bond film.
Yeah.
I never want to see it again. Whereas I will happily go watch Die Another Day and laugh my ass off.
Exactly. The beard and the long Pierce Brosnan with the beard and it is hilarious. It's hilariously terrible. But again, though, we've talked about this already with Star Trek and stuff. Took itself far too seriously. It's like, here's the new James Bond film. We know it's the new James Bond film. Of course we're going to go and see it. You don't need to make it something that it doesn't need to be. It's and again, Last Crusade, great example of that. It's just a big night out of the movies. It's an action romp with movie stars. It's not high acting, it's not high art. It knows it's not these things, and that's fine. That's okay.
But it's a good story well told.
Exactly.
And that's the key.
Which is what we're all aspiring to.
I don't need all the sort of,
absolutely
heady, whatever stuff.
Absolutely
good, well-told stories is all I'm looking for.
That's all we're looking for. That's all we ask for. Exactly. And that's all we aspire to as well, I guess.
Indeed. Well, Jonathan, this was good fun.
It was. I'm sorry I rambled on for so long as I did, but that's what happens when you get.
That is what this show is. This show is me and another person rambling for an hour, 2 hours about stuff we love and things like that. So
long may continue.
Yes, we will find other things to bring you back and
I'd love to. It would be my pleasure.
Great. So anyway, thanks to everyone who tuned in live with all your questions and comments. They were a lot of fun. I will be back. I think I'm back next week. I'm pretty sure I got something going on next week. Just stay tuned. But yeah, anyway, enjoy your evenings and or days, whatever time it is where you are, and see you next week.